Thanks for the question, and this is something that we actually get a lot. LPR stands for lawful permanent resident or lawful permanent residence. It's the same thing as a green card, and basically what it means is it gives a non-citizen the right to permanently live and work in the United States. There's a number of requirements of LPR status if you actually have a green card, such as keeping a clean criminal record and not spending too much time overseas, etc. But here we're talking about how to qualify for it. In general, and this is a very big question, I should preface everything by saying that, but it's a very big question, but in general, you're gonna need a petition approved by a qualifying family member or an employer in order to qualify for LPR status. Now, there are a number of different ways that somebody can self-petition for a lawful for LPR status or for a green card, but let's talk about the petitions first. In general, you need to have a petition filed by a family member, as I said, and that's usually on Form I-130. It has to be filed by a family member that the U.S. law recognizes as having a family relationship that qualifies for sponsorship. That might be a spouse who's a U.S. citizen. It might be a brother or a sister or a parent or an adult son or daughter, someone over the age of 21. And those are the only family members that qualify. But just because they can petition for you doesn't mean you'll necessarily qualify for the green card. Because one of the other requirements generally is depending on where you're trying to apply for the green card, whether you're applying inside the United States or outside the United States, is that you generally have to be in status, right? So if you've fallen out of status or have violated or worked without authorization, there's a general rule that says that you cannot file for LPR status even with an approved petition, right? Outside of if you've committed that violation. Now, there are some exceptions to that, the most notable one being a petition filed by an immediate relative, a spouse who's a U.S. citizen, or an adult child, or if you're trying to file for a parent, right? So a lot of things have to be looked at in order to determine whether, because if they're not able to qualify, if you're not able to qualify for LPR status inside the US, then you have to leave. And if you were out of status or committed some other immigration violation, leaving means you're not going to be able to come back in unless you qualify for some kind of waiver. So unfortunately, there's no simple answer to the question. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the forms of self-petitioning for a green card or LPR status. Asylees, people who have won asylum or refugee status inside the United States, they can file for a green card without having anybody sponsor them or petition for them. Similarly, victims of domestic violence. Under the Violence Against Women's Act, it's called VAWA, but it applies equally to men or women or anybody, any gender, who have been abused by a U.S. citizen or LPR spouse, parent. And certain types of visas, employment-based visas, where or employment-based cases where you can show that you've risen to the very top of your field, the so-called Nobel laureate or genius visa. They're also allowed to self-petition for a green card. But in general, you're going to need the vast majority of green card cases are people who have been sponsored by a qualifying family member or a qualifying employer. There also is another big one is non-LPR cancellation of removal. And if you're in removal proceedings or deportation proceedings, and you can show that you've got a relatively clean criminal record, that you have 10 years in the United States before being placed in removal proceedings, and you can show that you have that your deportation would cause an exceptionally high level of difficulty, of hardship to a qualifying U.S. citizen or LPR family member, then in certain circumstances you can apply for a green card directly from inside removal proceedings. So the law on LPR is very, very complicated. and there's no way to tell for sure whether you're going to qualify unless an immigration lawyer does a very detailed analysis of your entire immigration history. And if there is a way, a good lawyer should be able to find it. I appreciate the question. As always, remember, prosperity is a human right, and we're here to make sure that you are able to exercise that right. Thanks for the question.